Chag Sameach. Okay, so last night we began counting the Omer. And if you forgot to do this at your Seder, and now you're like, oh man, I forgot it. Don't worry, you can still do it today. I feel like the first night of the Omer is the hardest because I usually set a reminder on my phone and then I don't get it when I'm at Seder. But that's what happened last night. And so the counting of these weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, it's really what remains of what was once an agricultural ritual that we read about in the Torah reading today. Right? At the beginning of the barley harvest, the first Omer, the first sheaf of barley, would be harvested and brought to the temple as an offering to God. And it seems pretty straightforward, but it was actually the subject of one of the hottest debates during the Second Temple period. And so our task today is to discover why that was such a contested issue. So I'm going to hand out some source sheets. Don't look ahead. Okay, stay with me. So the mitzvah of the Omer offering and counting the Omer is given right after a passage that speaks about Pesach in Parshat Emor, which we read today. So verse 15, Usfartem lachem mimacharat hashabat, miyom haviachem et ha'omer atnufa, sheva shabatot tmimat tiyena, ad mimacharat hashabat hashvi'it tisperu chamishim yom v'hikravtem mincha chadasha ladonai. Okay, and from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the Omer offering, the day after the Sabbath, that's our key word, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord. So in verse 15, we have our Omer offering, and in verse 16, we have what will become our Shavuot offering 50 days later, 49 days later. And the key word here is that's going to tell us when the Omer happens is mimacharat hashabat. Okay? So literally it means the day after Shabbat, right? But what Shabbat? Which Shabbat? How are we supposed to know? And so Rashi addresses this. He summarizes the Talmud in which the rabbis interpret Shabbat here to mean not a regular Shabbat, but actually Yom Tov, the first Yom Tov of Pesach. Because sometimes Yom Tov is actually called Shabbat. Like we cease from work. Shabbat is to cease or to rest. We do that on Yom Tov. Sometimes Yom Tov is called Shabbat or Shabbaton. And so the rabbis say the Omer offering is to be done the day after the first Yom Tov of Pesach. So the 15th of Nisan was yesterday, the first day of Pesach, and then on the 16th of Nisan, which is today, they would perform the Omer ritual. And today we're in Shul celebrating second day Yom Tov, but remember at the time they didn't have that, so it would have been the first day of Chol HaMoed. So that's how we end up with our calendar, where today is the first day of the Omer, and in 49 days we'll celebrate Shavuot. But there's another way this could have gone if we hadn't gone with the interpretation of Yom Tov, right? In the time of the Second Temple, there were multiple sects within Judaism, and they had really significant disagreements, not unlike the Jews today. So the rabbis and our tradition, we're the intellectual descendants of a group called the Prushim, or Pharisees, and the other main group was the Tzadokim, or Sadducees. And then there was another group called the Baitusim, but for our purposes today, they're the same as the Sadducees. So you only have to remember Pharisees and Sadducees. And the Sadducees didn't believe in the oral Torah. They were able to take that verse from the Torah literally, of Mimacharat HaShabbat, the day after Shabbat. They said, day after Shabbat, that means the day after the Shabbat of Pesach. So the Omer would always start on a Sunday, the Sunday after the Shabbat of Pesach, right? So you might, instead of starting the Omer on the 16th, you could start it on like the 18th or the 19th, whatever it was that Sunday after the Shabbat of Pesach fell. And so even though we don't side with the Sadducees, their calendar does avoid a certain problem that the Pharisees run into. If you always harvest the Omer on a Sunday, you'll never have to harvest it on Shabbat. But if you always harvest it on the 16th of Nisan, sometimes the 16th of Nisan will fall on Shabbat. What's the problem? No work on Shabbat. Are you really going to go out there and harvest a big sheaf of wheat. Okay, so it's not actually a problem. The rabbis say the Omer offering takes precedence over Shabbat, so it's actually a mitzvah to harvest this sheaf of barley on Shabbat for this higher ritual purpose. You can imagine if you're a Sadducee, you'd be pretty upset about that, people going out there and just straight up harvesting barley on Shabbat. So the Mishnah, which as the Mishnah being authored by the rabbis is part of the Pharisees' tradition, explains how they would harvest this ritual. This is source 3, okay? How would they do the reaping of the Omer? The agents of the court would go out on the eve of the holiday, and they would make the stalks of barley into bundles while they were still attached to the ground, so that they would be easy to cut, as if you didn't have enough to do when you're getting ready for Pesach. And all the cities that were near there, the people would come so that it would be cut with great fanfare. Once it got dark, so now this would be on the 15th of Nisan going into the 16th of Nisan, the reaper would say to them, "Has the sun set?" So now we're on the 16th of Nisan. And they would answer, "Yes." "Has the sun set?" They would answer, "Yes." "With this sickle?" They would answer, "Yes." "With this sickle?" They would answer, "Yes." "Into this basket?" They would answer, "Yes." "Into this basket?" And they would answer, "Yes." And on Shabbat, he would say to them, "Is it Shabbat?" And they would all answer, "Yes." "Is it Shabbat?" And they would all answer, "Yes." "Shall I reap?" And they would all answer, "Reap." "Shall I reap?" And they would answer, "Reap." 3 times for each question, and they would answer, "Yes, yes, yes." I heard a "get it over with" from over here, right? So what is going on? Don't read ahead. Why so much? Even the Mishnah asks this question. Why so much? Why are they repeating everything? Why are they making it such a big deal? Then the Mishnah answers this question. To prove wrong the Baitusim, the sect akin to the Sadducees, who would say that the Omer was not reaped on that day. Okay, so not only do they have a disagreement about it, but then the Pharisees, the rabbinic tradition, would make their whole ritual really elaborate just to prove their point, just to prove that it was okay to harvest on Shabbat and get everyone on board with it. And isn't it beautiful how the Jewish tradition, how we just engage in respectful debate with each other, and we've always been able to do that. So we see that they have this really intense disagreement. Anyone have any ideas about what's at stake in this disagreement? Like, what are they actually arguing about? No wrong answers, because it's really hard to say. Yeah. Oh, great. Okay. If you do it on that Shabbat, people might think that it's okay to harvest on other Shabbats. Anyone else? So Shavuot in the Torah does not have a fixed date. It's only said in relation to when the Omer starts. So according to our tradition, where the Omer has to start on the 16th, then Shavuot will always be 49 days after that. For the Sadducees, they would have a lot more variables in when Shavuot would fall. Yeah. So if you care about the date of Shavuot, that could be a factor. Michael? Yeah, that's definitely a strong element. A strong element here of reading the text literally versus reading the text with interpretation and being able to make that leap and say, Shabbat doesn't always mean Shabbat. Sometimes Shabbat means Yom Tov. Yeah, Ken. Oh, great. Yeah. Right. We're not just timing these offerings, we're timing huge pilgrimages to Jerusalem, which could have an economic impact. That's really interesting. Buzz? Yeah. Are you saying that you mean with the yes, yes, yes part? Right. Um, yeah. Like, what would have happened if they said no? Are they really deciding together? Great. Yeah, Nancy. Great. Great. Which is more important, the offering of the Omer or Shabbat? Terry? Mm-hmm. Right. And would we actually have had two different Shavuots happening at the same time? The Sadducees were the priests. They controlled the temple. So they actually have, like, anyone can go out and harvest the Omer, but they were probably controlling what was happening in the temple at the time. Yeah, Ellen? Yeah, that's a really good question that I'm not sure the answer to, of how this actually played out. And the Mishnah, they're also kind of writing it after the time of the temple. So it's possible that they're writing their version back, and that we don't know if that really happened that way. Maybe some more like historical scholars could be able to tell us. Okay, so all of these are really great suggestions, and none of them are necessarily like right or wrong. I think all of these are possible, and some of them even have a really strong grounding, like the idea that it's the difference between the oral Torah and the literal Torah, right? And that's something that we always have a disagreement between the Pharisees and Sadducees about the oral Torah, right, or not accepting the oral Torah. But what's going on with this specific mitzvah? So I found a shiur, a lecture from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, which he gave to yeshiva students in Israel in 2016. And I found this because I really could not figure out the answer to what they were disagreeing about so vehemently. So I just really Googled and I found this great lecture. And it's really drashy, okay? So this might not be the historical answer, but I think it takes it to a really cool, interesting, interpretive place. So it's a longer lecture. We won't go into all of the background of it, but basically Rabbi Sachs makes a connection between the two approaches, between these two groups, and the miracle of the manna. Okay, so this is because the word Omer only appears in the Torah in two places. In the mitzvah of the Omer offering, which we read today, and also in relation to the manna when the manna arrives in Sefer Shemot. The Israelites leave Egypt, they're eating matzah, the bread of affliction, and then they're given manna. And manna is the bread of freedom. And we know that the manna began falling on a Sunday because the Torah, when the manna falls, says collect it for 6 days and then collect 2 on Friday and don't collect on Shabbat. So that's how everyone agrees that the manna started falling on a Sunday, right? So for the Sadducees, who always harvested the Omer on a Sunday, he makes that connection that for the Sadducees, the Omer represents the freedom of eating manna instead of matzah, right? So we have Pesach, and then we have manna. We have the Pesach holiday, and then we have the reaping of the Omer. But what about the Pharisees? So he points to yesterday's Haftarah from Yehoshua, so I hope everyone was paying attention. When the people enter the promised land, they observe Pesach on the eve of the 15th of Nisan. They offer the Pesach sacrifice, and it says, Mimacharat ha-Pesach, the day after the Pesach offering. And then the manna stopped, and they ate the produce of the land. So we have this word mimacharat, which makes that link, the day after Pesach, and that's actually when the manna stopped. So we have these two moments, when the manna started and when the manna stopped. So now we're going to go into text 4, actually reading from Rabbi Sachs. But now you can see something very interesting. According to the Prushim, we celebrate not the beginning of the manna, but the cessation of the manna. That was the day the manna stopped. That was the day they started eating the produce of Eretz Yisrael. And so remember, he's speaking to yeshiva students. So he says, now please explain to me the difference between manna and the food that is the produce of Eretz Yisrael. Are they the same thing? What are the differences? And a student says, one is produced by a power, one is produced by man. Yes, the manna comes from Hashem without our having to do anything except collect it. But one we have to work for. Let's look at the differences. Number one, the manna came from the midbar, the wilderness, whereas the new grain that they ate in the days of Yoshua comes from Eretz Yisrael. Number two, the manna was miraculous, but the grain from Eretz Yisrael was not miraculous. Number three, the manna is a gift from God, whereas the new grain involves some human effort. Number four, the manna is described in the Torah as lechem min hashamayim, whereas bread from Eretz Yisrael is hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So manna comes from heaven, ordinary grain it comes from the earth. And the manna, according to Rabbi Akiva, is also lechem shemalchei hasharet ochlim oto. Manna is the food that even angels eat, whereas we eat regular food that's grown from the earth. So now here's his take. Now, I believe that everyone agreed that Sfirat HaOmer is about celebrating the bread of freedom as opposed to the bread of affliction. But we now see an enormous disagreement between these two groups as to what freedom actually is. Is freedom your being in the wilderness and bread comes to you from heaven by a miracle? Is that freedom? Or is freedom crossing the Jordan, entering the land, conquering the land, and then planting and plowing and sowing and reaping and baking? Is that freedom? And you can see these two completely different shitot approaches. Okay, don't read ahead. Pause here. What are we taking from this, right? Especially those of us who are not farmers. How should we interpret what Rabbi Sachs teaches about these two approaches of what it means to be free? Rabbi. Mm. Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, David?
Take a little bit of but it seems like the rabbis like people to have a little skin in the game. So it seems like Rabbi Sachs seems to be leaning a little towards the food from Eretz Israel.
Great. Yeah. Something you've invested in. Marcy? Mm-hmm. Ken? Great. So if you didn't hear that, Ken said, yeah. Mm-hmm. If you're always dependent on the manna, and if it doesn't come, if you're dependent on something, you're not really free. Yeah, sorry, Sharon.
There are two kinds of, this is a second part, there are two kinds of freedom. There's freedom from, which is the less mature, we're free from Egypt, and then you evolve as human into freedom two. And freedom two is the ability to engage in your own life in that core part of freedom.
Incredible, right? Freedom from Egypt versus freedom to. And this is also the journey of the Omer. We go from the freedom from Egypt to receiving the Torah on Shavuot, right? The freedom to actually commit to something and to live a life with purpose. In both situations, we're laboring, right? But in one, we're laboring for the Egyptians. In another, we're laboring in partnership with God for higher purpose. Arlene? Mm-hmm. Right. Even in this second model, we still have dependence on rain and so many factors. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, right? The manna is such a prime example of not doing work on Shabbat, and yet, yeah, we do have this Omer situation where you can do it on Shabbat, this rare exception. Yeah. Anyone else want to add anything? Yeah, Lou?
I just want to come back to what was said, which is, how on earth did the rabbis arrive at the idea that we don't work on Shabbat? The halakha, as we have it today, Shabbat holds everything. And so the idea that one time, one thing in the Torah completely overrides Shabbat, violate multiple interpretations that the Pharisees gave us, former their descendants, the rabbis, as to what is and isn't permissible, the 39 forbidden things. And I think parsing Omer violates at least two reasons here.
Great, yeah. I mean, we're cutting, we're reaping, there's a basket, right? We're probably going to travel to the temple. So I'll add that we have to remember that in temple times, they were also offering sacrifices on Shabbat. So when we do, Musaf in a minute, that's because they actually did an additional sacrificial offering on Shabbat. So they were slaughtering animals and like lighting fires, and there was actually malacha happening in the Beit HaMikdash. But we see this model of like this exception, right? That malacha can happen for this higher purpose. And so I think the Omer fits into that. But we still might have an inclination to minimize that labor. Yeah, Ken? Sharon?
I think the other thing we're allowed to do on Shabbat that wouldn't make sense otherwise is Eliana.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could think of the cutting of the Omer as a renewal of our covenant with God in the same way that we think of the Eliana.
Great connection, yeah.
That there are very few things that would we would do on Shabbat, violate Shabbat more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think these examples of that sometimes we do break Shabbat to do a mitzvah shows just how important mitzvot are, right? That these are this is the purpose which guides our life. And this, like I said a moment ago, and like Sharon said, this is what this journey from Pesach to Shavuot is. Freedom from to freedom to. On Shavuot, we commit to something, we have a higher purpose. And that's also the difference between being in the wilderness and being relying on the manna and actually doing this agricultural labor of producing something, right? That we are making an effort to create something in the world that makes the world better in some way. And so I want to close with Rabbi Sachs's words because I just thought that this was a stunning way to think about what it is that is our purpose that we're doing what we're doing with our freedom. To be free does not mean sitting in the wilderness with Hashem providing your every need. To be free means going out there and showing people that Yiddishkeit makes a difference. It makes a difference to Yidden, it makes a difference to non-Jews as well. Go out there and show that we are the people who 36 times were commanded to love the stranger. We are the people who go around curing the bad things of this world. We are the people who believe in peace. We are the people who believe that to be free, you have to let go of hate. Let's go out there and become Hashem's partners in the work of creation. Let us show that freedom is not waiting for Hashem to do it all, but for our going out there and being Hashem's partners and bringing his Shekhinah, the light of that glory, to the dark places of this earth. Chag Sameach.